I don't think the Conservatives can win the next election, to be honest. I have never known a political situation before. I have never read about one, say possibly the early 1930s, when it seemed so clear, not merely to me, my view doesn't matter particularly, but to the entire political class. You talk to politicians, you talk to newspaper editors, you talk to everybody who is keenly interested in politics, and they simply make the assumption that Labour is going to win the next election, and the real question is who's going to win the next election after that. Now, no Conservative will say that in public, of course, but I've heard almost no Conservative say anything different in private. But can I just add that there's an awful lot, it seems to me, of scapegoating of William Hague going on. I actually think William Hague is proving a remarkably good leader of the Conservative Party. He has brought about a major internal reconstruction of the party. It's a much more efficient, much more democratic organisation than it was. He has done a very good job, despite the events of the last couple of weeks, in damping down the infighting that could have taken place in the Conservative Party, given the differences over Europe, given the differences over the future of the Thatcherite project. And he's been very responsive to what it was that cost the Conservatives the last election. William Hague is suffering from having inherited a very deeply divided party, and a party that became very unpopular in government. And the notion that you Conservatives' fortune by changing the leader seems to me just daft.
Can I just say, because Tony earlier said we couldn't win in the north and we could only win in the southeast. I just heard we won Derbyshire, Dales and Carlisle, both off Labour, neither of which we expected to win, which I think does show that we are making gains right across the country.
Okay, I'm just wanting to have a quick word with Robin Oakley, our political editor, who is now over at Labour Party headquarters down there on Millbank. Robin, what are Labour telling you tonight?
Well, Labour are acknowledging that they could be on target to lose about 1,000 seats overall when this night is over, but that won't worry them very much because they are defending the results of 4 years ago when they actually gained 1,600 seats in the course of the night. They're defending 172 of the 362 councils that are up for grabs tonight, so they were inevitably expecting losses from that all-time high result last time round, and they're pretty content that they're containing them at the level they are. They fought this election very much on the big picture, with Tony Blair staying somewhat aloof, presenting himself as the war leader, and Labour concentrating on the government's delivery of promises nationally rather than on the local government effort. They think that's seen them through to what is going to be for them quite a respectable result tonight.
Robin, can I just draw you briefly into the conversation that we were having there with Tony King and Michael Ancram? Would it be your assessment as a seasoned observer that frankly, given the position the Tories are in now and what we know of today's results so far, that William Hague frankly stands, well, it's going to be almost impossible for him to win the next election. Would you agree with that?
On this set of figures, it is very unlikely that he could make sufficient recovery to win the next election. Many Tory MPs who you talk to privately are conceding that the next election is lost, barring a miracle.
Robin, thank you very much indeed. We'll talk to you later on, and I'll certainly talk to you tomorrow when we're doing the Welsh results in Cardiff, so thanks very much indeed. Alison, you wanted to add a quick word over there about what Robin was saying.
Well, just to say really that from looking at a panel study that I've worked on which tracked voters from the 92 election to the 97 one, the two key things really that were responsible for the Conservatives never quite recovering from the fiasco surrounding Black Wednesday were the two things that they're suffering from now: disunity within the ranks and voters' perceptions of how they will deal with the welfare state.
Thanks very much. Now, we were talking earlier on about Peter's survey. There were lots of bits in the survey which we haven't touched on. I want to touch on two of them right now and just show you one of the questions we asked, and here it is on your screens now. If in the future Scotland were to become independent and leave the UK, would you be sorry, 29%, pleased, just 16%, fully 50%, neither pleased nor sorry, frankly didn't matter, 5% don't know? That's the first one I want to show you. The second one I want to show you is this one here, which is a rather longer question. Do you agree or disagree that creating the Scottish Parliament will eventually lead to the complete breakup of the UK and the Union? Almost a half agreed with that, 39% disagreed, 4% frankly didn't care, and 10% didn't know. Now, that was a sample size of 1,000, that's across the UK. interesting things there. Michael Ancram, could I start with you as a Scot and ask you whether these tend to confirm the fears that some people in your party have been expressing about the whole process of devolution?
Yes, they are fears, because we still believe that the way that devolution was set up by this government was inherently unstable.
I mean, they're not figures that suggest massive scares, are they?
No, but I mean, as a constitutional party and as a unionist party, what we've now got to work to do is to try and recreate a stability within a devolved United Kingdom. This is going to be the major challenge, I think, over the next 2 or 3 years. And we are going to see very severe points of pressure growing between Scotland and England and Wales. Now, we've got to find a way of making sure that those aren't allowed to fulfil the projections that your polls show. But there's always a danger, though. When you create something unstable, there's always a danger, in the words of one Welsh MP, Labour MP, during our debates, that the United Kingdom will start unbundling without anybody being able to stop it.
Is that a fear, Margaret? It'll start unbundling, that this is what you started off? But I mean, there is a view that, you know, Tony Blair walked into this policy, he inherited it, you've heard it said several times, and frankly wasn't prepared for what the consequences might be. Now, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I think it's rubbish. It's been discussed for decades, not just years. It's clearly been something which was felt to be extraordinarily important, particularly in Scotland. And I can perfectly understand. I mean, we're talking about, with all due respect to statisticians, we're talking about 1,000 people across the whole of the United Kingdom. I think it's entirely possible that not many of those people will necessarily have taken on board the slightly complex argument that says that you might save the Union by devolution, which if you hadn't done, you might have provoked independence.
It's the big argument that Gordon Brown's been proposing.
I think it's an interesting poll, but I'm not sure it tells us much.
Simon?
I share Margaret's last view. I think the reality was, we've argued it for 100 years, Margaret's party has been converted to it more recently, that in the words that were used a lot over the last decade, the settled opinion of the Scottish people was that there should be devolution to a Scottish Parliament. They voted for it overwhelmingly in the referendum. Wales was entirely different. And they will be very glad that they now are governing themselves on domestic affairs. I think we will then have the debate, and the difference between the three parties and the SNP will be that we will want in varying degrees to make sure that Scotland understands that it can have autonomy, have devolution, have self-government, but within the United Kingdom that helps and supports that. The only criticism I have, is a fundamental one, of the Labour approach, is that because they come to devolution as a result of pragmatic political response to pressure, as opposed to political long-term conviction, they haven't thought through all the implications at all. And there will be an English issue from tomorrow. Margaret's charged with it in her House of Commons duties, as to why, for example, as an English MP, on English rate support grant, English transport money, money for local government, Scottish MPs can come and vote and perhaps influence the decision, whereas I will not be able, nor should I, to vote on the same decisions in Scotland. The Labour Party never addressed the whole constitutional question.
Why not, Margaret?
And that's a major failing of their proposals.
I don't believe that is a necessary area of great concern. I mean, I take entirely the view, I mean, it's not so very long ago the Conservative Party was in favour of devolution. And at that point they wrestled with exactly these issues and came to the conclusion that it was possible to sustain those different pressures within a United Kingdom Parliament, and that is my view.
We're coming to the end of this section of the programme. I just want to sort of tie up a few loose ends. Alison, you were talking there about the change in attitude perhaps since '97. What was the point there?
Yes, I mean, really just to look back at the two figures that were shown on the screen and say that those questions were first asked immediately after the referendums for the Scottish Parliament in '97. And what's clearly happened since then is that people within England have become much more accepting both of the possible inevitability of Scotland gaining independence, but also of the fact that it will be managed as a separate country and dealt with considerably.
Okay, Tony, again, as I say, we're building up the end picture here. What message are we leaving with viewers this morning about the general picture? Where can you tell us we stand?
Well, I'm sorry to bang on about this, but I think there are at least three general pictures. Fine. There's a Welsh picture, where the Labour Party has done reasonably well, but not nearly as well as they were hoping. Fine. There's a Scottish picture where, as predicted, Labour is not, it looks, going to have an overall majority. And then we have almost the kaleidoscope of English local government. The Conservatives have made real gains in England. There's no question about that at all. It's been a very good night for the Liberal Democrats. And as Margaret Beckett has kept saying, it's not been at all a bad night for Labour 2 years into a new government. there should be actually a rather remarkably large number of pretty happy people about the place.
Well, that's good news, Alison. Yeah.
I mean, of course, the other main point is, and I mean, here I'm banging on about it, is the appallingly low turnout, both in the local elections and in the elections in Scotland and Wales.
A final point to each of you, if I can, Mrs. Beckett.
Well, I still remain of the view that if at the end of the night, for the first time this century, we are ahead on share of the vote halfway through the term of the Parliament, that will be an unprecedented and remarkable achievement.
I mean, why is there such a difference in that and your lead in the opinion polls?
Well, as we've all said repeatedly all night, these are actually local elections. People tend not to go and vote in the local elections. But it's an equally, being ahead in share of the vote at the midterm is just as big an achievement as the scale of the victory we had in 1997.
A sentence,
Bigger,
Michael?
maybe.
Okay, sentence.
Well, we're moving in the right direction, but most importantly for my party is we're beginning to win again. And that's going to be very important in psychological terms.
Thank you. Sentence, Simon.
We have done better than 4 years ago in terms of share of the vote, better than the general election, and better than last year. Given everybody said we were going to go down, when we two are going up, it's a brilliant result, and Paddy deserves the plaudits that we want to give him.
It's a very happy studio in Westminster, I can tell you. Right, let's have a quick upsum for you, finally. Labour on the scorecard, having lost control of 8 councils, the Tories having gained control of 17, Lib Dems having lost control of 5, no overall control, down by 4, Independents, no change. Main Conservative gains, Bromsgrove, Hertsmere, Worthing, Rushcliffe and Gedling. We go on to look at the other gains by the Tories, Forest Heath, St Edmundsbury, Derbyshire Dale, South Hams and Daventry. On again to look at Lib Dem gains, Sheffield and Stockport, the 2 stars for them there. And Lib Dem losses, rather unfortunately for them, Chelmsford, Cheltenham, Harrogate, Pendle and Eastbourne. And looking at Labour's gains, Wellingborough, Walsall, and the Labour losses, Stafford, Preston, Kirklees, Newark and Sherwood. I would like to thank all my guests here at Millbank, including our politicians and our expert commentators. Time now to hand you back to Kirsty Wark in Scotland.
So here we go. We can just give you the results up to date as we have them in now after 3 results. And let's go through them now. We have the BBC forecast based on 3 results that we have. It says that Labour will be the largest party, but still, as it was in our BBC poll, no overall control. And we can perhaps look at that now. That's 3 for Labour in Scotland, SNP none, Liberal Democrats none, Conservatives none, and others none so far. And we can look at the headlines now. Tom McCabe elected as the first ever member of the Scottish Parliament at Hamilton South. And that was a very early result. That result was just after 12:15. And Karen Turnbull was the first woman MSP. She also is a Labour MSP. And she was followed by Janice Hughes, who is the second woman Labour MSP to the Scottish Parliament. So that is it. 3 results in each one of these results, the Labour vote was down, usually against the SNP vote, which was up in percentage terms. And now we can go straight over to Peter. Peter.
Right, Kirsty, and here they are on the map, those 3 results in so far. Red splodges in the central belt of Scotland. There's Clydesdale, there's Hamilton South, and there's Glasgow Rutherglen there. 3 results in. Constituency results, of course. Much later on, we'll be getting the tot-up of the regional votes in the regions, and then, of course, some idea of what the top-up seats will show. Interesting things, we're going to see any Liberal Democrat and Conservative MSPs elected in these constituency seats. Now, what about the share of the vote so far then? Let's just trace the history right back to the early days in Scotland, back to 1950, when the Tories and Labour were fighting it out for first place, both way up there in the 40s, between them over 90% of the vote. Right down the bottom here, 0.4%, that's the SNP in 1950 with the Liberal Democrats on 7% there. Look what's happened since then. 2% the SNP still drifting along there in 1955, Anthony Eden's Prime Minister at the time, and there's Labour stretching through 50% there. Sorry, that's the Tories. Sorry, the Tories actually taking the lead there at 50% in 1955. So the Tories on top in Scotland at that time. Look at the changeover by that key election of October 1974. The SNP leaping up into the headlines with that record 30% there, 25% the Tories by that time, dropping down, and 8% the Liberal Democrats, with Labour Party also dropping down, with the SNP moving up there, and battling it out, a 3-party battle in October 74. The SNP then drift down again, a rather disappointing 25 years for the SNP, until we find in 83 the SNP back at 22%, the Tories way down here. Don't forget, this is Mrs. Thatcher's big high watermark year all over the rest of the country, down to 18% here, the Tories, with 13% the Liberal Democrats, and Labour way up the top there. Now, our BBC election poll suggests that we have something like the share of the vote now that shows Labour at 42%, comfortably up at the top. The SNP challenging their own record of 30% back in October 1974. This is the first votes, by the way. The second votes are slightly different. We're taking the first vote as being the sort of guide mark for our share here, balanced against the rest of history. 13% the Tories, really fighting it out for third and fourth place with the Liberal Democrats down the bottom there, Kirsty.
Thank you very much, Peter. Well, at this stage, we can go to our roving reporter, Michael Crick, who's out in the capital in Edinburgh in search of parties, and we do believe he's found one. Michael, where are you?
I'm at the Scotsman party here in Edinburgh, here in this fine building. And I've got with me three of the guests, Lorraine Fannin, who is the director of the Scottish Publishers Association, John Spence, who's the chief executive of the Lloyds Bank TSB in Scotland, and David Purdy, who is a poet. Now, David, are you excited by the prospect of a Scottish Parliament?
I'm delighted. It's something I've wanted for many, many years, and I'm very, very optimistic. I think that...
What sort of issues do you think they should be trying to make a difference on compared with Westminster?
I hope that it will be less confrontational than Westminster. I think the fact that it's very unlikely that any party at any time will have an overall majority and that they'll have to cooperate, I think will make for more consensual politics.
John, is there any one issue on which you're saying to yourself, great, now we've got these people elected to a Scottish Parliament, we can now make a difference here and do this?
Absolutely. Business can engage with Parliament, Parliament can engage in business to create a new operating model, building on the consensus that David talks about. If business and parliamentarians get together, we can create an economy with competitive advantage. We need to create an economy which is there for wealth creation so that it's the benefit for all.
But aren't those the sort of things that businessmen have always said, whether there was a Scottish Parliament or not?
Yeah, but look at the unique opportunity. You are in a relatively small city. Business and politicians are close together. You have a small business community by comparison to down south, and from that you can create that true dialogue that's been so missing. You don't need to react and defend. You can create something which builds on each other.
Lorraine, is there anything you're particularly looking for the Scottish Parliament to do?
Well, I hope there'll be some commitment to the cultural sector. I'd hope that the arts and culture, literature in Scotland would get a good deal, because often it's sidelined. It's a crossover between that commercial activity and the cultural activity that gets sidelined in Scotland. And we've already seen the rest of the world looking quite closely at us, more so than usual over the last while. That's very encouraging, and I hope it goes on, and I hope that the new Parliament will actually work towards helping us on that whole thing.
How did you vote today?
Well, for the first time, I voted SNP.
Is that because you want to see an independent Scotland?
Not necessarily at once, but because I felt that we'd been terribly patronised by a lot of the media, who seemed to think that that was completely to be sidelined because we really weren't up to being self-governing. And I think I felt a slight rebellion about that and decided I'd vote SNP.
David, do you think, I mean, you've been writing to the Scotsman apparently for a long time about these kind of issues. Do you think that the Labour, Donald Dewar and the Labour Party in Scotland, and indeed the people, you know, in influential positions in the new Parliament, should be looking for issues on which to make a mark? And are those issues going to be ones where they're at variance with Westminster?
I hope that they won't be at variance with Westminster because they want to be different from Westminster. I hope that they will be at variance with Westminster only in that they will be acting in the best interest of the people of Scotland.
John, do you think it makes a difference that there isn't going to be any party in overall control here in Scotland, whereas traditionally at Westminster there is?
Well, of course, it encourages this consensus which the politicians have been talking about so much. Given that you're not going to have an overall majority, parties will have to cooperate with each other, and with that go out and find the things on which we all agree. And from that, I hope that we will see some differences. If you are going to have the strongest Scottish economy and the strongest Scottish business sector, then you need to go out and make a difference. It's not about being different on principle, it's about making it feel different from what it was before.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for talking to me. Now back to you, Kirsty.
Michael Crick, off in search of another party. Well, let's tell you first of all that we are hearing now that we actually might get that Falkirk West result, the possibility that Dennis Canavan will be an independent MP in the Scottish Parliament, a thorn in the flesh of New Labour. We will get that declaration, we hear, within the next 15 minutes. But first, Brian Wilson, looking at these three results overall, it could be said that the reason that the Labour turnout is lower is simply because people were very concerned and backed up in a Maury poll of Labour supporters that they didn't want a Labour majority in Scotland. They didn't want a mirror image of Westminster. They wanted coalition politics, and that seems to be what these people are suggesting there. They wanted a new kind of politics in Scotland.
Well, I think you can be too sophisticated in trying to understand why there's a 50% turnout rather than a 60% turnout. I mean, the simpler answer is that 10% of people couldn't be bothered coming out for various reasons, whether it's weather or apathy or whatever.
But the truth is that after that that headline in the Herald, which said SNP in free fall halfway through the campaign, it did look as if either that was a rogue poll or if people took a jolt and thought, well, actually, perhaps we don't want New Labour writ large, or we don't want Strathclyde writ large, or Lanarkshire. We want a different kind of politics.
Well, the way this Parliament is constructed, the way the Labour government legislated for this Parliament makes it very, very difficult for any party ever to have an overall majority within it.
Is it the right way to legislate for it, do you think? Do you agree with
that? That was the Labour Party worked with people of goodwill within the Constitutional Convention, and that was the format that was come up with for a different kind of Parliament. And of course the people of bad will, of ill will, the Nationalists and the Tories stayed outside the Convention. So we actually shaped a political system which to some extent they'll be the beneficiaries of, and against our own interest. And that was done, and it will be looked back on historically as one of the great acts of political magnanimity in the 20th century.
I thought you were about to say political madness.
Magnanimity.
You're choosing your words very carefully, Brian Wilson. But I mean, on the basis of tonight, then, with the commitment by Tony Blair to hold a referendum on PR in other elections, and notably, of course, Westminster. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I think that's a referendum is the right way to proceed. And you know, there are other parts of the world which are going in another direction in terms of their electoral systems, because it gives too fragmented a result, so the people should judge. But let's get this in perspective. You know, that this was the election that the SNP had everything going for them, but a new political context was being created. This was voting about Scotland, 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 Scotland. And only a few months ago, they were 10–15% ahead in the opinion polls. So the idea that, you know, we get to the great day and Labour is holding the seats that we should seat, we're holding them comfortably. We are widely predicted to have be easily the largest party in the Parliament. If all of that turns out, and the SNP at the end of the night are saying we've done really well because we're second, then I mean, you know, I think people should question a bit more closely the legitimacy of that claim.
Well, at this stage, let's go straight over to our reporter Alan Mackay, who is at Dennis Canavan's count, and he's going to give us an update. Alan.
Thanks, Kirsty. Behind me you can probably see most of the candidates with the returning officer, and the only exception is Ross Martin, the Labour candidate, who we understand hasn't yet turned up. In the last few minutes, Dennis Canavan supporters continue to be very upbeat. There's expressions being used like weighing the votes for him. At the moment, the returning officer is with those candidates who are here. That's the SNP, Mr Canavan himself, the Tory and the Liberal Democrat, and they're going to be talking about any doubtful papers for the next few minutes. We understand Ross Martin, the Labour candidate, is on his way but hasn't yet arrived.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan Mackay. We look now that the SNP has won Moray. That is Margaret Ewing's territory, and so therefore Margaret Ewing will indeed be returned as the first SNP MSP in the Parliament, and in a moment or two we'll be able to give you the full details on that. That's the first of the Ewing dynasty that we heard from earlier on, going to be returned to Parliament. Perhaps her mother-in-law Winnie Ewing won't be long behind her, though we do expect that declaration much later, perhaps at 6 or 7 in the morning. But this is a very, very complicated system, and at this stage we should probably go straight over to Peter Snow, who's going to try and explain, in his own inimitable fashion, the new system. Peter.
Kirsty, it's not actually that complicated. It's called the additional member system, and I think Scottish people will know pretty well how it works by now, because you have two types of seat. you have 73 constituency seats, exactly the same as in the general election a couple of years ago, general election seats, except that Orkney and Shetland in Scotland have been split in two, so instead of 72 seats, it's 73. 73 constituency seats in which the winner takes all, first past the post. Now, the additional members come from the 56 regional seats, and the idea of those is that they top up the parties so that their share of the seats broadly reflects the share of the vote. For the first time, proportional representation. 56 regional, 73 constituency seats. Now, take an area like Lothians. Here, people had, all over Scotland, they had two ballot papers. First ballot paper, the first vote, was for candidates in the constituency, for the constituency seats. Fair enough. That would elect the constituency members. Then they had a second ballot paper where they voted for a party, and that will decide how the parties get topped up with those 56 additional members in the regional seats. Now, in Lothians, there are 16 seats. This is Lothians, the area around Edinburgh here, and in the last general election, this is what would have happened in Lothians today if everybody voted exactly like in the general election 2 years ago. 16 seats, 9 of them, these ones, are the constituency seats. All red for Labour, with one Liberal Democrat in Edinburgh West. So that's what would have happened. No sign of any blue on the map, no sign of any SNP. That's where the top-up votes help. Then, the other parties are helped by the top-up votes. These are the second votes that people use on that second ballot paper. They're totted up for the whole of Lothians. The share is worked out, and that share then decides how many top-up seats the parties will get that didn't do so well in the constituency seats. Look how well Labour did. 8 constituency seats here, and over here you have 1 Liberal Democrat seat. But look at the Conservatives. Nearly a fifth of the vote, no seats. The SNP, nearly a fifth of the vote, no seats. So how do we top them up? The answer is, of course, the parties have their lists down here. They presented lists, starting with the number 1 on the list, David McCletchie, for example, here in the Tory list, top of the list, and then James Douglas Hamilton, number 2. Now, this is the way it works. If it requires, say, 3 more Conservatives from that list there and 3 SNP members down here to make the pile of seats roughly equivalent to the pile of votes up the top, then they're elected. Look, 3 Conservatives, 3 SNP, and 1 more Liberal Democrat here, David Steele, Lord Steele, who wants to be Speaker of the Parliament. That will bring those shares of the seats up in line roughly with the share of the votes at the top, so that the top-up seats here help the Tories and the SNP to gain seats to make up for the fact that they're not winning constituency seats, that brings them roughly into line with their share of the vote. That's proportional representation in Scotland. Kirsty.
Thanks very much, Peter. And now we can look at that Murray result in some detail. And it is a very interesting result because although Margaret Ewing has held her seat, there's more information to come. She's held it with 13,000, taken that seat with 13,000 votes. Behind her, Ali Farquharson for Labour on 8,800. Andrew Finlay for the Conservatives on 8,500, and Patsy Kenton way behind for the Liberal Democrats on 3,000. Let's look at the share of the vote there. 39 for the SNP, 27 for Labour, 26 for Conservatives, and 9 for the Liberal Democrats. Now the change is what's interesting, and the change there for the SNP is down 3 percentage points, up Labour for 7 percentage points, down 2 for the Conservatives, and the Liberal Democrats on no change. Now let's look now at the East Kilbride vote in now. We have Labour on almost 20,000, Andy Kerr, SNP, Linda Fabiani on 13,500, Conservative Craig Stevenson on 4,500, and Ewan Hawthorne for the Liberal Democrats on 3,373. We look at the share there, that's Labour on 48, SNP 32, Conservatives on 11, Liberal Democrats on 8, and the change, Labour down 8%, SNP up 12%, down 1% for the Conservatives, and up 1 percentage point for the Liberal Democrats. Now, we're joined now by Anne-Lauren Gillis, who's the prospective European SNP candidate. Let's deal first of all with that Murray result. Now, that is a change. That's the first time we've seen the SNP vote drop tonight. Margaret Ewing's constituency takes in RAF Kinloss and Lossiemouth. Alex Salmond said that everybody in the party was behind him taking a stand against Kosovo. You remember his words were unpardonable folly. What do you put down her percentage drop in votes to? It surely is Kosovo.
Well, I suppose you have to see it in the context. We've seen a succession of good results comparatively.
But this is the parliamentary leader of the Scottish National Party. A percentage drop there is quite extraordinary.
Well, I suppose
that is the one place where perhaps it might have a disproportionate effect. Certainly.
But did she agree with the policy?
The whole of the SNP agrees with the policy, but unfortunately, it may be that in that particular constituency, it has a particular resonance, which I think will prove to be atypical. It certainly seems atypical in other constituencies where we had heard we were going to see the SNP being killed dead, and it certainly hasn't been killed dead, although it hasn't necessarily won. It has improved its share of the votes considerably.
Well, look, Brian Taylor, put some other perspective on that then.
There may well be another perspective involved here, which is that we've seen a string of results there with broadly a 10-point swing from Labour to the SNP, but they've all been west of Scotland. And the indication we're getting from our opinion poll is that Labour may be doing proportionately better in the Highlands and the North East seats. And Murray could simply be reflecting that, although I think the Kosovo factor has got to be substantial as well.
Well, at this stage, we've had Peter Snow take us through the system of the electoral system, but can you just explain the different declarations?
The way it will proceed is that we declare all the constituency seats in the way that we're familiar with at Westminster. They then start again to count the list seats, and they use that as a sort of counterbalance to the impact of those first-past-the-post constituencies.
The whole point about the list seats, though, is that although they are collected constituency by constituency, they are only declared at regional level.
They're calculated on a regional basis. They're all grouped together for the 8 regions, broadly the European seats across Scotland, and they're used as a counterweight to make sure that parties who get a string of good second places on the first-past-the-post seats manage to get that reflected on a regional basis. Just to be slightly cheeky for a second, we were talking earlier about the business. No party can expect an overall majority. Of course, the system was calculated at that, but it was calculated actually, to be precise, to prevent the SNP from gaining a majority. That was the intention of the way the system was drafted.
Well, I would specifically contest that. I mean, it was drawn up as a fair system, and I think you should give credit where it is due. It was legislated for by the party who had most to lose from putting that system in place, and that's the historical truth.
If you're contesting me, you should contest the General Secretary of the Labour Party at the last election. I asked him during the election campaign, Jack McConnell, was the system drawn up to prevent the SNP from gaining a majority on a minority of the popular vote, and McConnell replied, correct.
Well, it was drawn up in a way that makes it very difficult for any party to get an overall majority. But I think the interesting thing here, but as I've been saying, there's been a pattern of results from west of Scotland, and there's nothing mysterious about what is happening. Turnout is down in very safe Labour seats, and that reflects the Labour majority.
It might be that your Heartland Labour support, it might be your Heartland Labour support in central Scotland is concerned about adopting the Tory policy of PFI, is concerned about tuition fees. These might be issues that actually they're at odds with.
Well, let me come back to PFI in a minute, but what I was going to say is that for the first time now we've got a result from a different kind of constituency, and that is Moray, and we see a completely different pattern. So, as the night goes on, we'll see different patterns from different areas. I must take you up in PFI. I actually know something about PFI because it is not a Tory policy. The guy who introduced PFI in modern times into British political thinking was John Prescott in relation to the railways. And let me tell you this, Kirsty, but nothing happened.
Why did you oppose PFI in opposition?
Hang on, nothing happened. Well, wait a minute. Nothing happened under PFI in opposition because the Tories did not believe in public-private partnership, because it did not represent privatisation. And lawyers' offices in London...
But there was a hospital in the northeast of Scotland that was built under PFI.
Yeah, but what we opposed was the transfer of services, of clinical services. But lawyers' offices in London are stacked to the ceilings with documents for PFI projects which never happened because the Tories did not want any partnerships which did not result in privatisation.
And lawyers are making a fortune out of the individual contracts being negotiated all over this country for PFIs.
And what we have always said, and Prescott, long before, when the Tories were saying that this was all rubbish, that they couldn't embrace this, what we were saying is that if we are going to get more investment into public services, then we have to involve the private sector, whether it's railways, whether it's in my college, a further education college being built, which would not be there otherwise, whether it's 100 schools, as long as the services are in the public sector.
Well, we're joined now by the Conservatives' Liam Fox. Presumably you are delighted that the Labour Party is pursuing PFI.
Well, of course it was, according to Labour, a Tory policy before the general election, and now we have this wonderful rewriting of history. And of course it wasn't a Tory policy at all, it was always a Labour policy. But we've got used to rewriting of history under this current government, so that's really nothing new that they should extend it into the PFI area.
Well, at this moment we must go straight over to another of our reporters who's roving around the country, and Ken MacDonald has found himself in a pub in Orkney.
Democracy can be a pretty thirsty business, which is why we've repaired from the Pickacroy Centre to the bar of the West End Hotel here in Kirkwall. And it's worth bearing in mind that over the last just over 500 years, Orkney's been run from Oslo, it's been run from Edinburgh, from London, and indeed from tonight it's being run from Edinburgh again. But just how much closer is power coming, and indeed is it coming close enough to Orkney? The Orkney movement, what do you think?
Well, we certainly hope so. We've put a lot of commitment into the new Parliament. We were part of the Scottish Constitutional Convention, which recommended that Orkney and Shetland should be treated as a special case, and it also recommended that Orkney and Shetland would get a rolling programme of autonomy, of devolution. So we were disappointed the Labour government didn't put that into the Scotland Act, but we certainly hope now that the Scottish Parliament will give a devolution to the islands, and it's going to be vital for the future of the island communities that we do take on increasing powers.
Fiona Matheson, you're a former SNP councillor. Don't you have a problem here with identity? There are lots of Orcadians don't seem to think they're particularly Scottish. They're Orcadian first.
Well, I think that all of us who have been brought up in Orkney and gone south have part of the central belt in us, you know, through our education, and so we do, you know, understand the wholeness of Scotland as well as our island identity. But I mean, it is very precious indeed as our cultural identity foremost, I think. And there's no doubt that Orkney, Shetland and places like ourselves are vulnerable and are fragile and do need to be recognised and protected.
Mike Drever, you're hoping to be elected tonight as an independent councillor. How do you see it?
Well, I'm a political cynic, I have to say, and I just quite simply, I think if we have one party in the Scottish Parliament and overall power, I don't think anything different will happen.
Now we can go straight over now to Falkirk to have the results from Falkirk West.
Was as follows. Canavan, Dennis, MP for Falkirk West. Scottish Labour Party candidate, 6,300. There were 69 rejected votes. The total vote was 33,756, and I declare that Dennis Canavan has been duly elected to serve in Parliament as a member of the
So there we have it, Falkirk West, a terrible turn-up for the books for New Labour. Dennis Canavan is the first independent MP in Scotland since 1959. He takes a seat as an independent in the Edinburgh Parliament. Vindication of his decision to stand as an independent.
Madam Presiding Officer, I would like to thank you and your staff here in the Grangelands and also throughout the polling districts in the constituency, and also the police for the very fair and efficient way in which this election was conducted. I would also like to thank my agent Jim and my secretary Anne for putting up with me for the last 45 weeks. It's been a long campaign, and also all the campaign workers, including my friends and members of my family, when we embarked on this campaign months ago. It wasn't altogether clear in my own mind really what kind of team we were going to get together. But I think we've formed a brilliant team and we've achieved a brilliant victory. And I would also like to thank my opponents for a fair contest. The brilliance of my victory is tinged a wee bit with sorrow. sorrow that I'm not standing before you tonight as a member of the party in which I was virtually born and brought up. And I say this to my friends and colleagues in the Labour Party, many of whom supported me and worked for me in this campaign, that I do hope that some reconciliation might be possible, as long as there is an understanding that on my part there will be no compromise on the principles and policies which I have always held dear and which I used to think that the Labour Party also held dear, because this campaign has not been a campaign simply against a discredited selection system which brought the Labour Party into disrepute. It has been a positive campaign on principles and policies such as the right to work, the right to a free system of education, the right to a national health service which is the property of the people, and the right of people at local level to decide who their candidates and representatives should be without outside interference or central control.
There we have it. Dennis Canavan there. Victory tinged with sorrow, he says. Reconciliation but no compromise. He said this was a brilliant victory. Says Dennis Canavan returned as an individual MSP for Falkirk West after being rejected by the New Labour machine. Brian Wilson, that will be a decision that New Labour will come to regret?
Well, I just think it's a tremendous personal result for Dennis Canavan, and it would be ridiculous to say otherwise. And I congratulate him on it. And I think you can make a distinction here. It's not a New Labour machine. There was a selection process for candidates, and there were a lot of casualties within that process.
Had he served his constituency well since he was elected in 1974?
Well, look, frankly, having just heard that result, I don't know a lot about Falkirk, but what I'm saying is that the people of Falkirk have expressed a judgment on that, and that seems to be a lot more important than anything that I can say on the subject. And I congratulate him. But I don't, but you cannot, I'm not going to get involved in sort of saying that the selection process that omitted Dennis was some great conspiracy or New Labour machine or anything else. It was a process in which a lot of people lost out. Every party had one, other people lost out. Dennis took it another way, and he has got a very ringing endorsement from the people who know him best, who are his own constituents.
He said that he didn't fight the campaign in a kind of bitter and negative thing about the selection. He fought it on principles, and the principles for which he joined the Labour Party are principles which he clearly feels, and the people that voted for him clearly feels, do not hold across New Labour.
No, I think people, don't let's read too much or too little into this. I think that people in his constituency, the people who know him as an MP, think that an injustice had been done to him, and they have voted accordingly. And that is a judgment which anyone with any sense will respect and acknowledge.
Should the Labour Party go for a reconciliation with him?
Well, how that is done formally. Dennis. Dennis is been around a long time. He says, I want reconciliation, but by the way, I'm not going to, make any move towards it. That's for other people to work out. But all I say tonight is it's a fantastic result for a man who many of us know very well, have a lot of regard for. He's done very, very well, and I wouldn't take any of that away from him.
Would you second him into the Labour Party again?
Look, anybody can apply to join the Labour Party who accepts the rules and constitution of the Labour Party. If Dennis does that, then that is the way of it. Can I also say that the guy who went in there to fight the campaign for Labour did a good job as well, and he is not in any way diminished by it. But I think
he was battling against a rising tide.
He was battling against, obviously, collective perceptions arise, and it's perfectly clear that in that constituency the perception was that Dennis had been done wrong, and that they were going to support him.
Brian Taylor, what do you make of that result? I mean, it was quite an extraordinary extent to the victory.
It's a huge victory, but there's also an impact, isn't there, of the fact that if people are looking to demonstrate the need to contain political power, if they're feeling a little bit anarchic, the only way they can do it is by going against that political power. I mean, the reason perhaps that Govan down the years has so often and on so many occasions rejected the Labour Party is not perhaps necessarily instinctive support for the SNP. It's like the precocious child that can only appear to grab the attention of the wider world by saying me, me, and look at me, we're different. I think I've taken nothing away from Dennis Canavan's victory whatsoever, but the thing to look at in Falkirk West, that the only way by being a startling result is to vote for Dennis Canavan. If they voted for Ross Martin, voted for the safe establishment figure coming from the Labour Party, then that wouldn't necessarily be a particularly attractive way of representing the constituency, but a stunning result for Dennis Canavan.
We're joined now by Mingus Campbell, who will probably be one of the contenders, the Liberal Democrat leadership. Earlier on we had Charles Kennedy here, who will presumably be another one. First of all, Mingus Campbell, on Dennis Canavan's show, you've known him for many, many years. He is a man that he will not compromise.
He's not a saint, but he's his own man, and he always has been his own man. And I think it's a stunning result for Dennis Canavan, but I also think it's rather a good result for the system, because it shows in this new parliament there's going to be scope for people of independence and integrity like Dennis Canavan. They're going to be able to come through the system. And I think if you noticed, I mean, when he's talking about reconciliation there was nearly a tear in his eye. I mean, this is a very, very emotional occasion for him. And I've seen other interviews he's done in the last 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, he's obviously deeply, deeply upset at having to do this outside of the party in which I think he said he was born and brought up. But Dennis Canavan is clearly ready to effect a reconciliation with the Labour Party. I think the Labour Party would be very sensible to effect a reconciliation with him. It would show that they're big enough.
There is a sense when we speak to Labour over the last few weeks that they sort of say, well, you know, Dennis Canavan, he wasn't saying he should just go away with good grace.
Yeah. You see, he was described as not being good enough. Well, the people of Falkirk clearly don't agree with that judgment, and anyone who's known Dennis Canavan, seen him across the floor of the House of Commons, knows that this is a man, as I said, not a saint, but a man with extraordinary capacity for taking his own line, for not compromising, and for being, I think, a very, very healthy example of the parliamentary system at its best.
Well, let's go down to the heart of New Labour now at Delta House and speak to our reporter, David Porter. Tell me, David Porter, what has been the reaction at Delta House to Dennis Canavan's election?
Well, Kirsty, obviously great disappointment at the result. I think it was not unexpected that Dennis Canavan would take that seat. I think there has been genuine surprise, though, at the sheer size of his victory and the sheer number of votes that he had polled. So from that point of view, there will be disappointment. As I say, I don't think it was unexpected that Dennis Canavan was actually going to win the seat. Perhaps many people thought that he may have come through on the list. There was certainly a lot of work going on here early this evening and this afternoon, a lot of telephone canvassing going on to try and persuade Labour voters to get out in that constituency and vote for the Labour candidate. But perhaps to try and sweeten the pill slightly, there are some indications coming from sources here at Delta House that in fact Labour may have won the Govan seat. We don't know yet. There are indications and there are sort of strong rumours, shall I say, put it no more than that, that Labour feel they may have done enough to hold the Govan seat. So a disappointment from Dennis Canavan's point of view for Labour Party supporters here, but certainly they feel as though they may perhaps have done quite well in Govan, and indeed they feel they may have done well to hold the Govan seat.
And when we were talking earlier about the hand of friendship going over, we can just see now, so hang on, we can just see shots of Govan now. We can see there Mohammed Sarwar with his hands up in front of a pile of photographers. Now we don't have a formal result from Govan, but David, it looks like, you know, it will come the next 2 or 3 minutes, and in fact, certainly from these scenes, it certainly appears that you are right and that Labour has held on to Govan.
Well, you may have been able to hear some of the cheering that went on when people here were actually watching the pictures and listened to the pictures you were commentating over there. There is a feeling certainly here at Delta House that Labour have done enough to win the Govan seat, and that, as I say, will sweeten the pill slightly, but certainly they're disappointed with the result which has come from Falkirk West.
One of the things that we are hearing now from the count is that Labour might have won it with as few as 600 votes.
Well, that just shows, I think, how tight it was. I think everyone realised how tight the Govan seat was going to be. We knew that this was perhaps one of the swing seats in this election. It's one that the SNP have fought very hard. Indeed, it is sort of in the history of Scottish politics, isn't it, how important this seat has been to the SNP.
With all the difficulties that Labour have had in that seat, you know, it is surprising that somebody like Nicola Sturgeon, who put in, and of course the party machine for the SNP rolled into action in Govan. Not taking Govan this time is actually a much bigger blow to the Nationalists than perhaps not taking another of their target seats.
Certainly, like Nicola Sturgeon is one of the SNP's very high-profile candidates. She has had the portfolio of education. She's been one who has been pushed very, very strongly during this campaign. And I remember as soon as the SNP relaunched their campaign after there was a disappointing poll result, they went to Govan. They focused very hard on it. Alex Salmon was there, Nicola Sturgeon was there. They put an awful lot of effort into trying winning that seat, and the SNP certainly will be very, very disappointed if, as looks likely, that Labour have retained that one, albeit with a small majority.
Right now, Anne Lauren Gillis, we're expecting to get the SECC result in Glasgow there at Govan. But that would be a terrific blow to Alex Salmon, his lieutenant, Nicola Sturgeon, not return to an Edinburgh Parliament.
Nicola Sturgeon will undoubtedly be on the list in any case. If I could just return very, very briefly to the Dennis Canavan result, I think it's really a diminution of the man to talk about him as being a little anarchic or his own man. Surely he was for his principles, which are the principles that we did associate with John Smith and with the Labour Party as it was. And I would hope that that result there will reflect right across the country, as it already has in places like Clydesdale and Rutherglen and Hamilton South.
We can just see Dennis Canavan there posing for the photographers. That'll certainly be a prominent picture in the newspapers. Not tomorrow morning, of course, but perhaps later in the day tomorrow and then the next morning. Yeah, I should, of course, say that Nicola Sturgeon is top of the SNP list, so the chances are that she will be returned, but not to be a constituency MSP in the area of Govan. There's still a very big blow for the SNP.
It would be a great disappointment indeed. But as I said, there is no doubt that she will be in the Parliament, and there's no question that she was being pushed as such. She's an enormously able candidate, embodying all the best virtues of
it could be that in a constituency like Govan, the idea of a penny for Scotland in a constituency that's pretty poor would not necessarily go down very well.
Well, that isn't...
I must interrupt you there to say that now we have the constituents for the Govan seat coming onto the platform now, and the returning officer is about to make his declaration. Great noise in the hall there.
Here is the result of the election for the Glasgow Govan constituency. Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, 2,343 votes. Mohammed Aslam, Scottish Liberal Democrats, 1,479 votes. John Odell Foster, Communist Party of Britain, 190 votes. Gordon Jackson, Scottish Labour Party, 11,421 votes. Charlie McCarthy, Scottish Socialist Party, 1,275 votes. And Nicola Sturgeon, Scottish National Party, 9,665 votes. I hereby declare that Gordon Jackson is duly elected to serve as a member of the Scottish Parliament.
Well, that'll be a great relief to everybody at Delta House. Looking now at the result, that's Gordon Jackson on 43%, Nicola Sturgeon on 37%, for the Conservatives, Tasmina Ahmed on 9%, 6% for the Liberal Democrats, 6% for the others. And the change there, 1 percentage point down for Labour, 2 up for the SNP, Conservative and Liberal Democrat on no change. Now let's hear from Gordon Jackson.
For everyone, including the police who worked at the various polling stations, we are all the candidates grateful. I want to say thank you to my opponents. This has been, let me say, a very clean contest. There has been no abuse, and I, for my part, am thankful for that. I also want to thank the people of Govan who yet again have put their faith in the Labour Party. All I can do is say that what we will do is try to be loyal to that faith and to work in this Parliament for that constituency. And let me finally thank my agent, Stephen Curran, and the Govan Labour Party. And let me just say this, after all these weeks, please do not ever again write off the Govan Labour Party. Because that whole party, the whole party from the Member of Parliament downwards, have worked exceedingly hard and I am thankful to them for all they have done. Thank you very much.
There we have Gordon Jackson QC, a criminal lawyer, making his oration as he takes the Glasgow Govan seat. Brian Wilson, a sigh of relief?
Absolutely delighted. I mean, this was one where a few weeks ago the SNP were supposed only to have to turn up when they would walk home, you know. And I must say, I developed an allergy to the sort of really the arrogance of their candidate and their public utterances. So I'm delighted. And we've got a major Scottish political figure here in Gordon Jackson, another good Saltcoats boy, incidentally, into the...
Be earning a lot less as an MSP as he would at the bar, anyway.
I can confirm that. I can confirm that.
But you know, Gordon Jackson is a very powerful figure, and he came in late in the day in Govan. He's obviously rallied. He's got the basic Labour vote back, who you know had watched what's went on but remained loyal, and he'll be a first-class representative for Govan, and Govan deserves a first-class representative. I'm delighted.
Brian Taylor, he said, let us not ever again write off the Govan Labour Party.
No, indeed. A few key points there. First of all, the turnout very, very low, 49% turnout. I think this is an extremely good result for the Labour Party when you consider a couple of factors. One, as Brian Wilson says, the SNP put absolutely everything into this. Let that not be unsaid. And secondly, there was a socialist candidate, a Scottish Socialist Party candidate, who's picked up 1,200 votes.
Can I just break
Nicola
in there?
Sturgeon, I gather, about to speak.
Yeah.
I want to finish by quoting George Robertson when he said that devolution would kill the SNP stone dead. The evidence from around the country tonight is that the SNP is on the up and we are on the way to independence. Thank you.
Yeah, Nicola Sturgeon, feisty as ever, saying that devolution is indeed a stepping stone to independence. So now we can go straight over to Jane Frankie in Aberdeen, who has Alex Salmond reacting to the news that Nicola Sturgeon is not the new MSP for Govan. Jane.
We're going to have some disappointing ones, and obviously Govan was a disappointing one. But Nicola Sturgeon's a supremely talented individual. She's top of the Glasgow list, and she and many colleagues will be MSPs, members of the Scottish Parliament for Glasgow, before this night is over.
We've just heard Brian Taylor saying that the SNP put everything into winning Govan, and you haven't won Govan, and it's been used as a benchmark. You know, don't win Govan and really...
Well, as Brian should know full well, we've never actually won Govan at a general election, and this is the closest we've ever been. I mean, Nicola's taken almost 40% of the vote in a Scottish general election. But this is a general election, and Brian should know we're fighting across Scotland, and because it's a proportional system, we've geared our campaign not to target individual seats, but to make sure that the SNP advances the length and breadth of the country. And I think before this night is over, the extent of that advance will become apparent to everyone in your studio and to everyone in Scotland.
Significant, though, isn't it, that the swing to the SNP in other parts of Glasgow has been around the 9–10% mark, and yet in Govan was only 2%.
Well, that's because a large part of the swing was already there in Govan. I mean, in west of Glasgow, for example, Labour advanced at the last election. Nicola had a swing to the SNP in Govan at the last election. So the closer, the harder you go up, then, of course, the lower the swing becomes. I mean, in Bath-and-Buchan, I'm hoping there'll be a swing to me tonight, but I mean, we're nearly 60% of the vote, and you can't get much beyond that. And the same thing applies as we get to 40% of the vote, then obviously the swing gets less, but there was still a swing to Nicola Sturgeon in Govan, and she and many SNP representatives will proudly fly the flag for Glasgow in this new Scottish Parliament as the SNP advances right across Scotland.
You refuse to be downhearted, then?
I'm not in the slightest downhearted. There's going to be a lot in this night for the Scottish National Party, and a great deal in it for the future of Scotland.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Salmond. Back to you, Kirsty.
Mingus Campbell, a good deal of spinning, there by Alex Salmond.
It's brave stuff, but the fact of the matter is that Govan was #1 on the SNP's target list. And remember, they won a by-election with Margaret MacDonald. They won a by-election again with Jim Sillars. They threw absolutely everything they had into it. When Alex Salmond gave up the daily press conferences, he went off to Govan. That was the first place he went to.
The turnout is extraordinarily low there.
Yes.
Very low.
But it must be extremely... But traditionally, you would think that might harm the Labour Party rather than the SNP, as it happens. And the SNP must be very, very disappointed. There's another group of people there who deserve a certain amount of credit for the Govan result, and that's the Edinburgh jury who acquitted Mr. Sarwar, because that must have had a very considerable impact upon people's perception of the Labour Party in Govan. So the whole range of factors at play here, but the result is one that the Labour Party can take a great deal of comfort from.
And again, Mohammed Sarwar said himself that he only managed to get back into the fray 5 weeks ago and start getting out and campaigning.
That court case has hung over him and hung over Govan for what, the best part of 2 years? It must have been a very difficult thing for Gordon Jackson, especially someone who knew what the implications were, to conduct a campaign against that background. Now, on any view whatsoever, this is a very good result for the Labour Party.
One of the lowest turnout we've seen, 49%. And I think it says a great deal probably about the disillusionment of the people who govern with the political process and the sort of horrible fighting that's been going on there. I think that says a great deal about how people are feeling about the system itself.
Well, we can just hear that your second target, Eastwood, has been held by Labour. And we can actually look now at that detail. I'll just tell you that Ken McIntosh for Labour has held Eastwood. Well, Liam Fox, with a 2,000 majority over Councillor John Young, a veteran Conservative councillor, he has failed to make a breakthrough in Eastwood. That is pretty bad for you, Liam Fox.
Well, we'd like to have seen that won in the first past the post, of course. Haven't seen the vote, haven't seen what swing we're getting. We haven't seen that result through. Interested to see if we're making progress back there. But I think that our vote's holding up quite well, as we're predicting now to get some 18, 19 seats. And that's 18 or 19 more than we had this morning.
Right, well, we'll get that more in detail. But there we have SNP win Angus. That was certainly a shoe-in for the SNP. We'll get more details about that in a moment. But Alan Mackay is now talking to victorious MP Dennis Canavan. Alan.
Thanks very much, Kirsty. And as well as Dennis Canavan, I'm joined by Ross Martin, the man who he beat handsomely. Mr. Canavan, you were not selected by a panel, as has been stated already tonight, but there were others at the very top of the Labour Party who said you weren't good enough. What do you say to them tonight?
Well, I think that the people have spoken tonight. I mean, I felt I had no option but to let the people of Falkirk West decide whether I was good enough to represent them in the Scottish Parliament, and the people have spoken tonight, and that's it. It was a stunning victory.
What do you say to those people who voted for you?
Thank you very much.
Ross Martin, you said that New Labour chimed with the people of Falkirk. That was a big mistake, wasn't it?
No, not at all. Whether people see us or call us New Labour, Old Labour, Democratic Socialist or Social Democratic isn't really the point. The point is that our message chimes with the people across the country, which is why we'll be the biggest party.
But Mr. Canavan's message chimes with 12,500 more people than yours.
Well, clearly it's a difficult circumstance when Dennis has been the MP for 25 years, almost as long as I've been here. And we fought a brave, hard campaign, and we lost out this time. But many people kept faith with the Labour Party. I thank them gratefully for that, and we'll be back.
Mr. Canavan, are you going to cause more trouble for the Labour Party by standing down at Westminster and causing a by-election?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, I made it clear that my view is that no one can do both jobs. It's a full-time job being a member of the Scottish Parliament. You can't be in two places at one time.
But how soon would you want to do that?
I've also made it clear that I would like to have discussions with the Labour Party at local level, as distinct from the headquarters people who treated the local Labour Party members with absolute disdain. And I would like to discuss with the local Labour Party members the timing of my resignation from the House of Commons, because I don't want them to be left in the lurch whereby another candidate is simply parachuted in by headquarters. I think that we'd then be back to square one, and I would like to see them being given the democratic right to have a full selection process and choose a candidate who would be capable of winning the seat.
Ross Martin, a speedy by-election would be very bad news for Labour, wouldn't it, at this stage?
Not at all. We were growing strength throughout the campaign, and a by-election is something we'll have to consider.